This is the Seahawkers podcast, a special Christmas Day episode, and I am joined by my good buddy EJ Snyder, good buddy and Chicago Bears fan, as our Seattle Seahawks in Week 17 are going to Chicago and taking on the Bears. EJ, Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you. I'm glad that we get to start with something pleasant and happy and not talking about the Bears, because it is not pleasant and happy, but it's a gift for you and your fan base. You get to go to Chicago. Should not be that difficult to get a win right now.
It appears that way because, early on in the season, EJ, it started off so well. It was a promising 4-2 start for your Chicago Bears going into the bye week. And now, coming out of that bye week, they have not won a single game. What the heck is going on in Chicago?
One of the great mysteries in general, what is going on in Chicago and what happened specifically on the bye week, because the wheels fell completely off. Waldron ends up getting fired. Like Eberflus ends up getting fired after him. Thomas Brown takes over. There's another little flourish where the offense looks really good for 2 weeks. And then they're like, great, we'll make you the head coach. Nope. Immediately the wheels fall off. They go to play the Niners, come out extremely flat. And everybody just kind of throws their hands up at that point and goes, what in the world? Like, there were games certainly this year, even when Eberflus was still there, some of the divisional games, which were the things that got us really excited. Like, they should have beaten all three of those teams. They should have beaten the Vikings, the Lions, and the Packers. And they lost all of those games in heartbreaking fashion. But it was like, hey, we can play within this very talented division. Weird thing about the NFC North, best division in football this year. The Bears have more losses than anybody else in the division combined. Like, if you combine the Packers, Vikings, and Lions losses, it's not as many as the Bears. So the Bears are taking all the losses for the division, but 3 teams, double-digit wins. Not unheard of, but rare. So NFC North has come rearing back, except for the Bears.
Well, and I feel like as Seahawks fans, we're familiar with the powerhouse of the North this year because that is where I think a lot of the losses. I mean, you look at the divisions and how they match up, and we don't have any teams that are. I mean, maybe the Rams could hit 10 wins. I think technically, can we hit 10 wins? Yes. So. But a big reason for that is that we've had to play the Vikings, we've had to play the Packers, and we've had to play the Lions, and we see just how great all those teams have been this year. I'm kind of curious, where do those 3 teams rank out for you? Because each one has, I see the Vikings as a very well-rounded team. They have, I think, between the coaching, they don't have the best quarterback, but they make up with it for coaching. Like defensively, would they have the best of the 3? You would say no, probably that might go to the Packers. But it's how do you rank those teams out?
It's very difficult because they're all very good and for different reasons, but they all play everybody very tough. Like, they are not teams you want to play right now in general. Typically, when we've had 1 or even 2 of those teams in the division before, one of them was very strong and one of them was kind of a pretender. The Vikings a couple of years ago, many, many wins, but we called them out as paper tigers before the divisional round of the playoff and said, I would not be surprised if they lost the first round. They did to the Giants. But we kind of knew that just watching them play. This year, you watch all 3 of those teams play, and they're legitimately good teams. Packers took a little while to get rolling, but Matt LaFleur is a great, great coach. And the defense, as you said, has really come up. They've had talent before, but they've struggled with their coordination in terms of how the plays are being called and situational football on defense. They seem to have gotten over that this year. Detroit, great team, obviously rolled last year. This year, their story has been all about injuries and attrition on defense. They have more injured starters than any other team in the league on defense. And, some of the total number of folks that teams have on IR or physically unable to perform or whatever. Lions are up there too, but on defense, it's not even close. It's the Lions with a bullet. And yet that defense has still manufactured good games over the last month. Like, the job that their DC is doing is yeoman's work. He's doing amazing considering how many pieces have been taken away on that defense. Something like 18. It's ridiculous. The Vikings really like what Kevin O'Connell's doing on offense. Obviously, Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson, but I mean, other players as well. Go out and lose your left tackle, who's one of the best in the NFL. Trade for another one. He's been okay. Flores' defense starts off super duper hot, hits a stretch in the middle where it kind of looks like they got figured out, and then kind of same as the Lions. There's just been this little resurgence on Vikings defense over the last 3-4 weeks that makes you go, maybe they aren't going to be an easy out in the playoffs. Same as the Lions, like, well, they're just not going to be able to keep up with all the injuries on defense. They're going to get rolled. Maybe not. And then the Packers are just the Packers. Like, the Packers have the youngest offense by age in terms of starters in the NFL, one of the most talented in terms of when you look at their relative inexperience, they can punch with anybody because of LaFleur and his play calling and the fact that he's empowered Jordan Love to just turn it loose. Like, he is comfortable with the interceptions because he's going to get more explosive plays than he is interceptions, and he's okay with that. Like, yes, every coach would. It sounds weird to say a coach is okay with interceptions. He's okay with the types of interceptions because he doesn't want to sort of neuter Jordan Love and say, you got to play it close. He's like, no, turn it loose, because more often when you turn it loose, a good thing is going to happen for us. And so they've continued that balance. Originally, it was like, he can't possibly be okay with this. And then it was like, no, he is okay with this because it's working out in his favor way more often. So all three of those teams are, like, I can see, especially matchup based reasons, why you would not want to draw any of those teams in the playoffs. Like, if you're a certain type of team and you're looking at, if you've got a little bit of a weaker defense and you like draw the Lions, they're going to eat you. Like, Ben Johnson is going to eat you. He's going to put 50 on you.
So who do you pick as a favorite?
Right now, given their both experience and their overall talent level, but mostly it's that resurgence on defense that I kind of need to see, I would say Lions. Vikings, probably a very close second, and Packers leading the way as sort of the wild card team that you don't want to play because they're probably going to kick your ass.
Well, that could be the team that ends up playing the NFC West division winner. The Seahawks still have a chance despite a loss to the Vikings this past week, but it turns out, as much as the Seahawks are gunning for the West, really this game against the Bears doesn't matter a ton. I've seen this list, EJ, there's, I think, 14 or 17 games where if the outcome goes one way or another, then it goes to strength of schedule, and then the Seahawks can somehow get a win without the Arizona Cardinals getting the win on Saturday. But it really comes down to whether the Cardinals can beat the Rams, and then the tie-breaking procedures work out a little bit more in favor for the Seahawks with, they just have to beat the Rams because there's no tiebreaker involved when you have the better record at the end of the season. So.
No, it's fascinating as you get down to these scenarios, and teams that are kind of in it but not really, kind of hanging on by a thread, need a lot of help, need a lot of breaks to go their way. Teams that are completely out of it, like my team, who have been out of it for a month and everybody's checked out, and really, like, who's the next coach going to be, who are they going to draft, how are we going to fix this? The teams that are hanging on but they're kind of resigned to the fate of, like, we've 2 of 14 things go wrong, we're not making the playoffs, so we're not making the playoffs. And then there are teams who are kind of marching and rolling and really starting. Their fans are like, well, I hope this team loses because I'd rather play them than them, but we're definitely in it. We got home field advantage, and like 3 very different tiers of NFL fans right now. And it's funny because it's like one of those sort of chocolate waterfall things at the holiday party, right? You go from one tier to the next tier. Every week, more fans go down the cup, right? And you become like, oh, well, we were last week, those fans hanging on by a thread. This week, we're in the bowl with all the people that are just like, what are we doing next year? This didn't work. So it's a fascinating time of NFL year as that just sort of continues to happen.
He's EJ Snyder at Football EJ out on Twitter. He's also host of a new show called Bear Era. And so with the Bears coming up, EJ, against the Seahawks, just in terms of, yes, you're looking to the offseason, but is there anything that you're really watching for in these final couple weeks to maybe look at as a potential building block then going into next season?
Yeah, anything is the answer. And that's particularly what teams in the Bears position are going to be doing at this time of year, is evaluating players and saying, who wants to be here next year? Like, who's showing that on tape through ability, through effort, all of that. It's been a tremendously mixed bag, and that is up and down the roster from stars. We've had some very notable games this year on the Bears with stars looking completely checked out. You never know exactly what's going on with that. I mean, sometimes guy wakes up and he's been sick for 2 days and he has no energy, and they're like, well, you're standing up, we're going to give you an IV and you're going to start. And they go out and they, kind of run around, and you're like, God, he looks like he doesn't care. Well, maybe he just doesn't have any calories in his system. You never know. Or maybe he's mad at his coach and he really just doesn't care. You can't tell. But for the Bears, and specifically for whoever comes in as the head coach, it's going to be a real mixed bag as to whether or not to like save this film and look through it for, some hidden gems, or just kind of go, wow, that was a wreck. I don't really want to look at that. And yeah, of course they're going to look at tape of Caleb and whatever else. I want to see steady play from Caleb. He's the most important player in the building, without a doubt. That's not a question going forward. The question is, can he get out to a little bit of a faster start? Bears completely unable to score any points. I think the last 5 games until they scored in the first half of the last game they played. Before that, in first halves of the last 5 games, it was 73-0. Like, they're just getting shellacked, and they were always starting slow. And that means you're always coming from behind in the second half. That's a tough way to be. Caleb's shown a little bit of regression over the last couple of weeks because of gestures wildly at everything. There are plenty of reasons to pin that on, but he did rally really starting about middle second quarter of the last game and play pretty good football for the rest of the game. And I was like, whew, okay, because if it had gone the other way and just completely, missing wide receivers and holding the ball too long and all the things that people are talking about, it gets more worrisome the more of those you stack together. But he settled down, played decent football. That's good. I think probably that's going to be this sort of, maybe I hope there's a little bit more analysis by a new coach, but really they're going to look and say, no, this guy's not the problem. Like, we need to do some other things. And yes, these are some tendencies we need to get away from, but overall, even with everything that's gone on, and it's a lot. And as Seahawks fans, the offensive line has not been great in Seattle, in Chicago. Quarterbacks had to run for their life in Seattle, in Chicago. The one difference is, Gino's a 12-year vet and Caleb's a rookie. Even with all that, Caleb's had statistically a pretty good season for a rookie and definitely shown the flashes. People asked me, I just got asked if I thought that, I had any question about Caleb being the guy going forward. I don't. Like, he's got it. He's got the talent. He can be the guy. He needs some support. He certainly needs a coach who understands how to use him. Hopefully that's the biggest thing, is you get the right person at the head of the organization. And we saw it with the Texans a few years ago when D'Amico came in. That was a completely toxic organization, changed almost overnight. D'Amico comes in, gets Bobby Slowick, gets CJ. Boom. Nick Caserio starts bringing them talent. That organization is leading their division, right? Kind of automatically. Carolina, completely toxic situation. Very bad owner. Coaching was terrible. First round quarterback was in the dumpster. Dave Canales comes in. Doesn't look very attractive. Like, a lot of things you thought were working are not working. You definitely don't have a quarterback, so that makes it tough to come in. Canales, very familiar with. He resurrected Gino's career, resurrected Baker's career. Now he's resurrected Bryce Young's career. And that team is playing super hard. That tape down the stretch is going to be super fun to watch, because that team, not the most talented, almost no talent on defense. Bryce is playing better. The offensive line is playing better. Chuba's playing great. The young receivers are developing. Like, that's a fun team to watch right now. And it's because, again, 1 year, got the coach, brought offensive line coach with him from Tampa. Again, new general manager, a team that was completely down on their luck is now exciting going into next year. So it can happen. And that's my hope as a Bears fan. My PTSD as a Bears fan is they're going to ruin another one, because that's what they do. But I keep looking at those couple shining examples and saying, hey, this is what can happen. Detroit, when they brought in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, there was this initial period of like, oh, it's not working. And, the owner had to come out in support of Dan Campbell famously. And since that point, like, they're on the tear they're on. So it's very possible to do but you have to get those hires right. You have to get the people at the top of the organization correct. And people say, well, what about an offensive coach or defensive coach? You need somebody that understands the game completely, and it just has to be correct. If you miss, you're not going anywhere. I don't care what kind of talent you accumulate.
Yeah, it's interesting how it hasn't much mattered with those teams that you mentioned, whether or not they're offense or defensive. It's just that they have,
It's the right guy.
the right guy, and in situations where, yeah, bad ownership has tended to lead to bad decisions over a long period of time.
Sounds like
And
the Bears.
I mean, but the Lions, like you pointed out, were that way too. I was kind of
Texans, Panthers.
halfway through the
Absolutely the same.
season. I thought that Canales was kind of looking that way too. That he's not going to be able to pull out of this nosedive at all. And then they do, and now I'm mad at them because they beat the Cardinals last week, and now the Cardinals don't necessarily have much to play for other than pride now coming up against the coming up against the Rams on Saturday here. So I'm not too happy with them. But in terms of guys who are potential, are there any coaches that kind of fall into that for you on your radar, or it's kind of hard to just say, well, get the right guy, but I mean, because one of the hot guys is probably going to be Ben Johnson again this offseason, and how as much as he is good at coordinating the offense for the Lions, I don't know if he strikes me as necessarily one of those guys, and maybe you don't know you have that guy until he gets in and turns things around.
I think that's the case, because you can look within the division, within the NFC North, which is kind of what we're talking about today, and you can look at Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur didn't come with that tag. He wasn't a proven head coach. He was a young, hot offensive coordinator who everybody said, maybe, I don't know, can he do the top spot bit? Right? Head coach is a very different set of job responsibilities than any kind of coordinator, offensive, defensive, passing game, whatever. And he didn't have it until he had it. And he came in and he was dealing with a veteran quarterback who was a very strong personality. And he got him turned around by midseason and on his program and working together. And Aaron Rodgers famously said, okay, I get it now. We'll run motion. He was an anti-motion guy. And LaFleur was like, no, we're running motion. And here's why. And he explained it to him and stayed the course. And fired it up. And at that point, it was like, okay, he understands how to move people from point A to point B as a head coach. Kevin O'Connell, same way, same tree, right? He was the last head coach hired in that cycle, maybe one of the best, right? Over the time, he understands how to move people to communicate from point A to point B. He's done his own quarterback reclamation projects, right? They're working out for him. His team is double-digit wins right now and rolling towards the playoffs. Nobody had Kevin O'Connell as the, certified leader of men type. They had him as a, guy that used to play quarterback in the league, who understands offense, who, was in the same elevator with McVay. I realize it was a stronger relationship than that, but that was the joke for years. If you shared an elevator with McVay, you were getting a head coaching job. And he's turned out to be a tremendous head coach. If you told me that, through some Christmas miracle, I could snap my fingers and KOC would be the next head coach of the Bears, I would be so down with that. He seems so talented with people, with offense. Great match. You have to find that guy. And you asked me who's on my radar. It's it's tough. I don't sit down with these guys and talk to them about those things. I don't know those things. So I have to depend on other people's impression of that quality. How do they lead? How do they communicate? How do they inspire? That's a lot of your job as a head coach. Yes, you need to have the offensive knowledge, especially in Chicago. But if you can't do the other things, and maybe Ben Johnson's not that guy. Maybe everybody knows that. I don't know that. His offensive work has been amazing continually. Some of the best in the NFL, period, bar none. He has been able to stay ahead of defenses for 3 straight years who knew he was coming. They know his stuff, and he is still whooping them. That is a rare thing in the NFL. But maybe people look at him and go, I don't think he's a franchise leader. I don't know. I'm not in the room with him. I hope he is, because a lot of people are drawing those connections, and Ben is himself through his agent saying, hey, I'm completely open to it. And I don't believe in coincidence. You know that about me. That little stumble bum fake punt in Chicago against the Bears with Warren up in the box was yo, Kevin, I'm right here. I could be doing this for you or to you, your choice. But like it's not so, like that was an interview ploy. Like they didn't need that. And people even came out and said, why did they waste that against the Bears? They were kicking their ass. You keep that in the bag to the playoffs, blah, blah. Nope. That's what that was for. That was the little like wave the flag on the sideline. You're like, yo, it's mine. You want to see that here more often? I'm available. Call my agent.
I think being an effective communicator is a big part of that. And some of that you can pick up, I think, from their press conferences. I mean, I think
sometimes, but I don't know. Head
I don't know.
press
You're telling me that
conferences.
you couldn't tell from Shane Waldron's press conferences that maybe the communication wasn't there.
Well, in hindsight, not only about the press conference, but really the stories that come out when a coach leaves, right?
Yeah.
A lot of truths come out. A lot of people are waiting. They're sharpening their knives. They're waiting for that coach to get fired. When they do, the people that don't like them release all that stuff and it comes out in a big flood. And the thing that was pretty constant about Waldron was communication. Like he wasn't able to communicate. That was one of those storylines when he left Chicago. And then, of course, people go back and do the, retroactive digging, and they're like, well, his press conference was terrible. We should have known. Well, you got to say that beforehand. That's not how that works. But communication is a huge thing, especially with young players and developing players. And as fast as things move in the NFL in terms of changes and getting guys up to speed, there's no more like, oh, we'll bring him in and 3 years later he'll start for us. Like that's not an NFL timeline. 3 years later, he'll be out of the league. Like you have to get players in every year. There's a fresh crop of draft picks, free agency turnovers, a lot of turnover. It's one of the reasons for parity in the league. And you have to get your system installed quickly and guys up to speed quickly. And if you're not a good teacher and you're not a good communicator, and those two things are linked, you're not going to have that success. You're going to have a slow start to the season. You're going to be behind the eight ball. You're going to be poor in your division probably at that point. And it's going to be tougher to do what you want to do, which is win games, progress to the playoffs, and eventually win the Super Bowl. So you have to. It's almost a job mandate now of the NFL has moved past you. And if you're not communicating quickly and getting those things installed effectively and making changes very dynamically within games, can't wait till, we'll get them next week. There's not enough weeks in the NFL season to do that. So it's a key component. I think people are starting to understand that in a slightly different way than they did over previous years, decades. We'll see, but you got to have that. I don't care. That's when people really focus on side of the ball, offensive, defensive. I'm like, it's the little things that aren't the little things. You got to communicate well, got to be super smart, and you got to get people to buy in. And how do you quantify those things when you're not sitting in a room with somebody? I don't know.
Well, let me just throw out a name at you just to kind of get your temperature on it. How about head coach Ryan Grubb?
Might be a little early for that. Ryan learned some lessons this year in Seattle. It's been good to see him do exactly what we're talking about with Ben Johnson in terms of adapting. He brought a run game with him from UW. A lot of people thought he didn't have a run game. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Ryan Grubb's offense at UW was two things: running the balls and deep shots when you tried to stop him running the ball. And if you didn't stop him running the ball, he was just going to run all over you. Like he was perfectly happy to do that. I don't want to say it wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't like multivariate run game. He was going to run the ball. And if you could stop that, great. But if you couldn't stop it, he was just going to keep running. If you tried to stop it, he was going to play action you to death with all of his wide receivers. And that's what got all the press. Well, he brought that same approach to the Hawks. It's not that he didn't try and run. It's that he tried to run and it got shut down a lot more quickly early in the season. And it was ineffective. And then they tried to pass and the offensive line couldn't pass block and Gino was getting crushed. And it was like, well, now nothing's working. Like we have zero to lean on. Now what's going to happen? And he had to go back to the drawing board and say, no, I need to find a way to run in a different way than I did in college, but I can't not run. I need to come back and find a way that it can work enough that the other stuff I can leverage off it. Because if I just try what I tried and it gets stopped really easily and I go away from it, we're one-dimensional and we can't afford it. Like on the offensive line, it's not going to work. And he made that pivot. And, a couple of weeks ago, the run game came alive for a couple of weeks. It was Zach Charbonnet, but like they managed to make it go. And it's great to see coaches, offensive or defensive, make those adjustments, realize what situation they're in, that it's not the same situation they were in, And that's cool. So down the road, cool. I've never talked to Ryan Grubb. I know people who have from their descriptions. He is the most all about ball guy ever. Like they said, within 5 minutes, we were just talking ball, and that's all he really wants to do. And he just loves it. He just loves talking ball. He is a ball coach. And that's cool. That translates. Like it doesn't, you don't have to be that to be a head coach, but there are certainly guys that are like that. And it could work, but he's going to have to continue to adapt, learn his lessons, get used to the level he's at, stay ahead of the curve like Ben Johnson has. It's one of the major reasons Bobby Slowick's name isn't being bandied about as much this year. Last year, he was the wonder kid and definitely had everybody on the carpet for the entire year. This year, not so much. And he actually had more offensive line talent this year than he did last year. And so it's doing less with more. People are like, wait, that's not, the arrow's not going in the right direction there. So people have cooled on him a little bit, whereas Ben's just sort of stayed out in front of the pack. So if Grubb, who has now sort of regained his footing to a solid level, continues to learn, continues to advance, continues to adapt and iterate and stay ahead, and he has that sort of natural passion and sort of ball loving and can prove that he can get guys on his timeline pretty quickly, those are all good things moving forward. I would say eventually, give it a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm curious if he's going to have that long based on just how the season has gone. Because I started to see it too. It was at that point with Zach Charbonnet, and I mean, if K9 would have been healthy and back there, I think he would have had that same success because they were opening up holes where they weren't doing it early in the season.
Yep.
I think part of early in the season success that maybe NFL success running the football doesn't look the same as college success running the football.
It does not.
So I think maybe he got a little more frustrated by it than I think that he should have and stuck with it a little bit more early on. But then as much as I thought he was making progress, and as much as one of the things that I saw, EJ, with the Bears, I thought they had a lot of good success running the ball against the Vikings defense. And I thought, okay, going into this, after seeing what we saw with the Bears, like he's going to see that and build on that going up against the Vikings. And we saw stretches, EJ, where it was like, does he even know we have running backs? Like he was handing it off to JSN for the jet sweep. And, that's a fine play to mix in there. But when you go, 15 game minutes without handing it to a running back, then you start to wonder.
That's the best backhanded compliment for a run play I've heard in a while. That's a fine play to mix in there. Like, don't do that very often. No, I agree. Flores is tough. Flores has been around a long time. He's been a head coach, been a defensive coordinator. He has changed and iterated. He did it last year. He really changed on the fly. He changed what he was and who he was like in midseason. It was one of the coolest stories in the NFL that didn't get a lot of ink. He really changed who he was. And that was super cool to see. And his defense got a lot better because of it. So he's a bit of a chameleon and he can be tough week to week. He can, again, get punched in the mouth just like everybody else. It's tough to win in the NFL. We say it every week, that every Sunday. It's not like college. You don't get cupcakes. You definitely get teams at the end of the season that maybe quit, but that's rare. Typically, you can go up against a much lesser opponent in the NFL and get your teeth kicked in. It's just the way it happens. And Flores, Bears got on him a little bit in the run game, and he went back to the whiteboard and said, and came out and shut off a lot of those things against, I'm sure Grubb watched tape, right? But he came back and shut him down and said, no, you're going to have to do other things. And it's a constant chess match, quarter to quarter, half to half, game to game. It's a tough thing to stay ahead of. And I'm not going to put it all on Ryan, and it is very difficult, especially for coaches that have been super successful at any level, going to a different level and saying, I'm doing the same things and they're just not working. I need to stick with them. And that was the adjustment that Ryan needed to make, was these things are not going to look the same, but they're going to do some of the same things. So I can't just not do them because I don't get the same endorphin rush I did from doing it in college.
So, well, we'll see coming up against the Bears defense. And EJ, that was one of the things I think was surprising too, is that, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of Bears fans had hope for 2024 is because you had that stretch toward the end of 23 where the defense, they were flying around. They were, picking it off and, getting turnovers, and then what happened this season?
Oh, it's a good question. They didn't get a whole lot more pass rush. They had some key injuries that maybe weren't the folks that people were really focusing on. Kevin Billings or Andrew Billings in the middle of the line was really a guy that was sort of that they could sit in the middle of the line and do things around and just count on him being there. And when he went out, some other guys stepped up, but youth doesn't always pervade. The linebacker play has been pretty good. The safety play has not been as good. Jalen Johnson is still like an all-pro corner, and you will never convince me otherwise. Kyler was hurt for a while. UW star Kyler Gordon, who became a Bear, played nickel for them and is a dynamic playmaker when he was there in the early season and then left. And man, do they miss that guy. Like when he is not being that agent of chaos around the line, the defense plays very, very differently. And they don't really have another player with his skill set to do that, to just sort of sub into that role. So they really felt his absence for a while. And then late in the season, the trend that I've sort of been watching is the safety play is really fallen off. Owens made some really good plays early in the year. Kevin Byard looked like he'd not necessarily turned back the clock, but was holding off the sands of time. Neither of those things has been true over the past 3 years, and there've been a lot of breakdowns. And you know how it is with safeties. When you have a breakdown of safety, probably going to be a big player touchdown. That's been the case. It just, they don't have as much pass rush as they need. Sweat has not been the force that he was last year. Still a very good player, but there's nobody else. So you can
Daryl Taylor didn't work out. What I thought that
my feelings on Daryl Taylor. He's actually been a decent player for the Bears, but yeah, as a role player, outside linebacker guy, they can drop in coverage, very athletic, very quick. Like he's fine, but he's fine. He's a reserve, and you need
2 former Seahawks with Jacob Martin too.
Yeah, you need a couple of folks that can create pass rush, and they're really hoping for some of their rookies to step up. Javon Dexter had a very good early season. I think he's just kind of worn down. Zach Pickens really hasn't ever turned into the player they hoped when they drafted him right next to Javon Dexter. And they're going to need some more pass rush. There's no doubt about that. The linebacker play, I think, is solid, good, fine. The safety play is you might need 2. You might need to say bye to Kevin Byard and Jonathan Owens and go get a couple of young safeties, or again, a veteran in free agency and draft one in the 3rd or 4th round that you really like that, because Brisker has had nasty concussion issues this year. They're not his first. That's really scary for a high impact player like him. Don't know what that means going forward to him. I hope he's healthy. I hope he comes back strong. You never really can tell with head injuries though. So you went into the season feeling really good with like, hey, we're doing Brisker, Byard. We got a vet and a exciting young player who's played really well and been an impact guy for us. Then we got Owens behind him as a third safety. That's great. Well, very quickly you're leaning on Owens as your starter. And, again, Byard looked really good through the first half of the season and then not so much. And they've kind of dropped off together. And look, it's hard to tell. Late in the season, you're out of it. You've had massive changes at the coaching level. A lot of guys are just kind of making business decisions and saying, look, we're out. Can we just, it's the Madden thing. Can I sim to end the season? Like, I want to sim to the end of the season. Like, and that displays itself in a bunch of different ways. But going forward, I think there's more holes than we thought maybe there might be or would be. If Brisker comes back healthy, maybe you just get one safety and that's good. Linebackers, again, I think are okay. Got to have pass rush, probably interior and exterior. That's tough to get in one cycle. Corner, you're really good. It's the one place where you have multiple guys who can come in and play at a high level. So yeah, they played really well. And then honestly, I
didn't hear you mention Tyreek Stevenson though, in terms of the corners. Is he
Tyreek's
kind of been
a good young corner?
He's
got to get his head straight. As a physical player, he has all the skills. Was always going to get a bunch of penalties because he's a physical press corner. He'd love to be handsy. And that was the scouting report on him, is he has all physical tools, but he's going to have to come into the league and figure out what they'll tolerate. It's not the same as college. He's going to draw a bunch of flags. That's year 1. Year 2, you want to see a drop off in that. If a guy's going to develop, we saw a little bit of drop off in the PI, but we've seen all the other things in terms of not being focused and, getting benched. And it was super rugged. Honestly, the Hail Mary broke this team because the defense was good up until the Hail Mary. It was good through the last half of last season, and it was good until the Hail Mary. And I had a whole bunch of stats. Yep. And I had a whole bunch of stats worked out. I can give you like EPA per play and everything else. Like average yard per play went up by like a yard and a half after that. It went from like 4.1 to like 6.3 or something. It's crazy. Like, and it goes right down the line with all the stats. They just like, they broke. Like the Commanders broke them. And after that, all the things that people would say about, well, Eberflus is a good defensive coach. He calls it a good defensive game. You started to see big explosive plays like before halftime. You started to see long runs and game breakdowns at the end that you hadn't seen before that were on the defense. And you're like, is he though? Like he was, but is he? And then after 5-6 weeks of that, you look back and you go, oh no, like since the Hail Mary, they've been terrible on defense. They're not good anymore. And it just literally broke them as a team.
I mean, part of it is that play, I suppose, because I mean, you had that win against the Commanders locked up until that moment. But then, I mean, I could kind of understand some of the emotional stuff coming out into the Cardinals game. You go on the road and get hammered there. But then to not bounce back against the Patriots, because then I could kind of make the excuse of, well, then you just ran into a buzzsaw of teams with Green Bay and Minnesota and Detroit and the Niners.
The crazy thing is they should have won all 3 of those games, the division games.
Oh, yeah, they're all tight, like within Lions, 1 to 3 points, right?
Packers and Vikings were, I mean, the Lions one was the one that got Eberflus fired because it was on Thanksgiving and the entire country had to watch him just melt down in the last 4 minutes when, again, should have won that game. The Vikings, they recover the onside kick. Again, they probably shouldn't have been in that game. Only 3 or 4 onside kicks have been recovered, this entire year, but they actually recover one and they have a chance to win the game. And they don't against the Lions. They're pushing the Lions. These are the power teams in the NFL and in their division. All 3 of those games were winnable games in not big stretches. And that was like, okay, so they can still do it. But after the Hail Mary, and then you lose close, and then you lose in like barrel burning fashion to the Lions on Thanksgiving in front of the entire country. And that was it. They everybody just kind of, the coach gets fired. Like that's it.
Yeah, and I guess they missed their window then for the bounce back kind of emotion with the interim head coach. So
the 2024 Chicago Bears, I guess they missed their window. Yep.
They had 100%. Some windows.
But, they had many. And again, they, you talked about it. 4-2 before the bye, some winnable games coming up. Like everything looks pretty good. They had they had 2 really good games.
Commanders on the ropes. They had 2 winnable games. Man, I mean, yeah, you talk about you win those 3 games, you're 7-2.
It's right there. And you have some division games clicked off as W's. You could have potentially 3 of them.
Now I'm worried for tomorrow. Now we've talked my way into being worried about the Bears.
You should not be worried about the Bears because after that, I mean, honestly, it started with the Hail Mary. Like that was the beginning of the serious downward slide. After they came close, again, you see teams just trying to push through it, a little bit of extra effort. Like we can do it. We're so close. And they were, but they lost all 3 there, all 3 divisions. The Detroit one in really gut wrenching kind of mind bending fashion. Coach gets jettisoned. And at that point, like nobody's going to go climb the mountain again. They said they wanted to. They said, like, we want to play for Thomas Brown. We love it. The first time they did with him as head coach, after 2 good offensive showings, as he'd been elevated to the offensive coordinator for a couple of weeks, they go to San Francisco, and that game was horrendously flat. Like, there was no fight in any of them, and that was the one I really went, oh, we were talking about that on Bear Air, like, like they all said they wanted this. They all said this was the change they needed. They all said Eberflus was the stick in the mud that they couldn't get around. They come out and they give that effort on the road against San Francisco. Like, ooh, it might be Jover at this point. Like we're talking about done. And it was, and it has been. And at that point I said, I don't think they're going to win another game. And they haven't been close since.
Well, one of the things that you and I end up talking about, EJ, within the offseason is the draft. And I know you're probably shifting your mind that direction as a Bears fan, but
Yep.
I'm also a little bit curious just because it's been another year with Geno Smith and it's been up and down. And I love Geno as a quarterback. I love his story. Now he's getting into that place and age where you start to look and say, well, even though he's had this resurgence, it's probably time to at least start looking. I thought it was time to start looking last year, but John Schneider didn't. Looking ahead to the and I don't think we know who all is returning. We've started to see some whispers of who's returning to school, who's not. But how does this look for a quarterback draft coming up in 2025?
Love your Geno. Protect your Geno. Hold your Geno close. You don't.
There's a segment of the fan base that doesn't want to hear that, but he does have a year left under contract, and so
I fully
we
understand.
are able to.
Like, this quarterback class is not great.
Yeah.
It's a big drop off from last year. There are good players in this class. Very few of them. As always, supply will outstrip demand. That's going to be tough. Supply is not great and it's dwindling. Carson Beck just announced that he's having, quote unquote, season ending arm surgery. That vetoes his entire pre-draft process. He's not going to throw. He's not going to run. He's not going to be doing anything. He's going to be interviewing and that's it. So he's essentially
he is coming out.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought he still had a year of eligibility possibly.
He might, but I think Georgia might be ready to move on there. So that's the other tricky thing. But other guys have said they're going back. The LSU quarterback, Nussmeier, said he's going back, and he wasn't necessarily going to be a top pick. But again, you start cutting the foundation out of what's there, and like there are very few options left, and there are teams who have a far greater need than the Seahawks, so are going to be more motivated to give up draft picks, trade, whatever they need to do, because they don't have an option. They don't have a Geno. And Geno's played pretty darn well this year. The things he hasn't done well are frustrating. Red zone interceptions, super frustrating. You look at what he's been able to do with the line in front of him, it's been superhero stuff. Like, I know people don't want to hear it because the overall record is not that great. And yes, he throws back-breaking picks in the red zone, and people get on him about that. But you look at the balance of what he does across the board. Geno's played at a really high level. He has not shown, for the most part, the drop-off outside those interceptions. He's got to get over red zone interceptions. But everything else, and there's a lot of else, he's done tremendously well behind not a lot of support. With a new coordinator.
With a new coordinator, can you make that argument that with Sam Darnold being a free agent, that is
you could. Now, that's one of the few upgrades. But again, if you're saying you're not
is it an upgrade?
You could at least make an argument that it's on the same level. Anybody coming out is not on the same level. So that's tough to spend a high draft pick on, because you're going to have to do that. And again, you have how many teams in the NFL? 6, 7, pretty easily right now without any changes that need a quarterback, like don't have any good option heading into next year. So Darnold is one of the few options out there that is probably going to be available where you could say it's at least on the level and it's different. And if we want to move on for whatever reason and we can no longer stomach red zone interceptions, but we're going to take more sacks or whatever else, whatever the balance is. But you're not the only ones.
Why wouldn't the Vikings keep him?
JJ, they're very hot on JJ. And he would have been the start of this year. Yeah, he would have been the start of this year with that. Well, the second one was more exploratory. It wasn't reconstruction. Okay. So it's okay. Like, easy for me to say. I'm not a doctor and it's not my knee. But no, the Vikings are cool with it, and they're much higher on JJ than a lot of other people are. So he would have been the starter this year.
Oh yeah. Well, it was trending that way. It's just
no, but for all the right reasons, not just because they picked him. Like he was farther along, and everybody says that, but he was farther along from. We just had Arif Hassan, noted Seahawks fan, Arif Hassan, on Bear Air a couple of weeks ago. I talked about this. This was my one question to him was the Sam Darnold question, like what's going to happen. He said, I really don't think they're going to resign him, not because Sam hasn't played great. He has. A lot of the guys on offense rallied around and said, let's get Sam paid this year. They're fully aware that he is probably going to make his money elsewhere because the team is extremely high on JJ. And he dug into this a little bit. He said, so everybody says, oh, they're farther along when they're a rookie quarterback. And you start to dig in and you say, why? And they're like, well, is it comprehension? Is it leadership on the field? It was kind of all of those things with JJ. They were all the marks were greater than what they expected, earlier than what they expected. So yeah, outside of the injury, he was 100% full steam ahead, going to be the starter and probably, the long-term answer in Minnesota. At least that's what they think. So the likelihood that Sam stays around is unlikely. But we get back to the demand question, right? You got 6 or 7 teams. They don't have a Geno. Like, they would kill for a Geno right now. They absolutely. And maybe you parlay that if you think the switch is worth it. But again, your question is valid. Is it an upgrade? It's at least a push. And all the other options we're talking about, either in free agency or this very depleted draft class, are not a push. They're starting from farther down. Now, you may think the ceiling is higher. So NFL general managers make that gamble all the time, but that's a tough thing to do with a team that's, still in the division hunt at this point of the season. You pretty much got to be leaning into, this is going to improve our football team starting very soon, as opposed to, this is going to improve our football team 2 years from now when half of these guys have already left.
Let's go back to Carson Beck then, because he was a guy who, toward the beginning of the season, I think he was looked at as one of those potential top guys
100%.
Coming into 2025. The fact that with the injury, him not being able to do all these things, then that probably makes him at least the back end of the first round type guy.
We'll see. I mean, the tape is more damning with Carson because he
didn't have a great season either, but
yeah, he came in with preseason All-America hype. He was definitely considered kind of leader in the clubhouse for one of the top few spots in this quarterback class. The more he played, the more people went, really?
Wait a second.
Like, I'm not sure that's true. Everybody keeps saying it. And then he kept playing and the results.
But the supply and demand thing, I feel like these guys that we talk ourselves out of, then they end up,
I'm not going to say that he's not, because again, people seem to think there's this mythical quarterback pool that you can go to that nobody else can touch.
Mm-hmm.
And there aren't. There are 2 places to get a quarterback. You get them from in the league through free agency or a trade, but trades are very rare, as you know, for quarterbacks who still have things left in the tank. Like, it happens extremely rarely. So really, it's from the league and free agency. Now a team has to, again, cut them loose in the rare situation where they have a presumptive starter behind them in terms of JJ and Sam. That happens occasionally, but not very often, because again, people know what it's like to wander the quarterback wasteland without an answer. It's not good. You will not win games in the NFL. That's it. Like, period. End of story. Or the draft. And that's it. There is no like magical quarterback tree you can go to. So if the draft kind of stinks, like, there are a few good players, but way more teams that need quarterbacks than guys coming out in the draft. And I think that's safe to say, even at this early point. Or free agency, where a lot of guys aren't even going to hit free agency. They're going to get re-signed. They're going to get an extension, mid-level deal, because people are looking at the quarterback landscape and going, there's nothing out there. Like, our guy's not great, but he's better than this.
I mean, to that point,
and that's it.
The Vikings, EJ, could say, oh, we're going to franchise Darnold now.
Yeah. Sign and trade is very likely because of that landscape. Like, Kwesi's no dummy. He's guaranteed got an option worked up for that because he's got leverage. He's in the catbird seat. He's fine. He's like, I have 2 essentially. You got none. Give me everything, because where else are you going to get it? And the answer is you can't. You can't run down to the corner store and get an NFL quarterback. It's just not possible. People go, well, I know the draft sucks and free agency is not great, but we need a quarterback. Like,
what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's neat. How's it feel to want? Like, it's not going to happen. And so that drives the price up. And it will absolutely happen with this draft class as we go through. We haven't even started the kind of rigorous tearing down of quarterbacks that occurs every single year, regardless of good or bad. It happened last year for Caleb and Drake, and it happens every single year. We haven't even gotten to that. And there's like 3 guys to focus on. You're like, we haven't even started tearing them down, folks. You know who's going to benefit is a former Washington State resident, Cam Ward. Cam Ward, because he had a little bit of that kind of buzz even in last year's class. Then he decided late to go back to Miami and had a pretty good season in Miami. And, Beck's hurt. Nussmeier's going back. Shadur's obviously coming out. We're going to see him down at Shrine Bowl. But there's two guys. And it was before the tearing down starts. And you're like, Cam Ward might be the guy standing on top of the pile at the end of this year because everybody else has gotten torn down around him. And he's like, yeah, I'm not maybe as good as 4 out of the 5 guys that went in the top last year, but I am clearly the best out of this particular heap.
Who you gonna take?
What you gonna do? And a team like, the Raiders, that's super quarterback needy, or insert team here. You got the Giants, you got the Raiders, you could say the Browns, there's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks. And the very first one might go, well, I don't want to pick Cam Ward 1-1, but I need a quarterback and nobody's going to trade up with me. And if they do, it's for him. So what are we doing here? There is a path to that happening. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I can see a future where Cam Ward is the first quarterback off the board because he's the best of what's there. And the need is great as always.
Yep. One of the owners is going to talk their general manager into taking a quarter. We need a quarterback. You take one. And you get the best one you can, and that's what ends 100%. Up happening sometimes with these guys that maybe not necessarily you would think go number 1, but that's what they have to do.
At one point, Achilles Smith was the guy.
Yeah. Yep. And we see how that worked out. So, well, shit.
I didn't tell you that. I forgot to tell you that.
What's that?
Achilles Smith's kid was at Elite 11 this year.
Oh, you're kidding?
Nope.
Wow.
Nope, I think he's a senior this year. So we were down in California at Elite 11, which is a passing camp, place where we saw Pete Carroll this year. He was down there hanging out. And we were down there with QB school. He was nice enough to say, JT was cool enough to say, hey, I know some of the folks that run this camp. Do you want to come? And we were like, well, absolutely. And I showed up and we're talking about it. And they're like, who's that? And they're like, that's Achilles Smith Jr. And we're like, wow. What? Okay. Fun stuff.
Yep. Your old win.
Oh, it doesn't even start. It's when folks who you watched plays kids have already had kids and they're now looking at being coaches. They've already gone through their whole playing career, maybe didn't make the pros or whatever, but and you're like, wait, the junior is the wide receivers coach at Tennessee? Oh my God. I watched his grandfather play.
Yep. There you go. That's
when I was a little kid. Yep. That's when you know.
Okay. Well, we will see coming up this week whether or not we know the future of the Seahawks and their football hopes in the playoffs. They got to get through. Well, like I said, they don't necessarily have to get through the Bears, but they do have to complete that football game to see what happens between the Rams and Cardinals.
Oh, that's classic.
Week 18.
Yep, that's a nice play to mix in there, and they do have to get through that football game. Okay, I'll take both of those away.
Hey, I'm full of on Christmas
gifts.
That's what I'm full of, EJ. That's what we get.
Full of gifts on Christmas. May you be full of eggnog later on.
What are you going to be full of coming up this week? You've got a special Thursday night episode of Bootleg Football. You're going to be enjoying this game live. Well, enjoying may not be the right word, but you're going to be viewing this game live.
Yes, I will be watching and talking about this game live on Bootleg Football. There will probably be drinking involved just to give everybody a little presage of what's going to occur. It's not going to be fun or glorious, but yes, we'll be live Thursday night as we are for all Thursday night games on Bootleg Football. Got a pod came out today, so that's going to be the only one for this week. And then Bear Era is going to come out after the Bears game on Thursday. We were going to push it and we're like, we'll know more after Thursday. We'll just do it in that gap in between Christmas and New Year. So that Bear Era will probably come out Friday or Saturday this week.
Well, there you go. If you really want to be a degenerate football watcher, you go to getintheflock.com. You pay $3 and above. You get into our Discord channel. So you have your Discord, and then you tune into Bootleg Football on YouTube and watch EJ and Brett. And then you have the game also live streaming on the television. And you just, all the senses are going to be, you got everything going on right there.
Speaking of, that's when you know. That's when
you know you're a degenerate football watcher.
100%. You checked all the boxes, like all of them.
Good. Well, that's I think that's what we hope to cultivate among everybody who listens to both Bootleg Football, Bear Era, and the Seahawkers podcast. EJ,
maybe.
And I think with that, there's only one thing left to say: Go Hawks.